refers to Gogol Ganguly, later called Nikhil Ganguly. But let's begin at the beginning. Though the novel does not begin at the beginning, let us begin chronologically at what happens. Well, in a typical Indian setup, in Bengal, you have a bride viewing. Well, most of you know what that means. When you're looking to get your son or daughter married, it becomes important, imperative, that the two families meet. And so, it is usually arranged in most communities of our country for the boy's parents, the boy, maybe a sister, a cousin, friends, maybe half a dozen of them, to visit the girl's family and meet, see, view the girl, as well as her parents, maybe an aunt or an uncle, an elder brother, a bhabi, etc., etc. Well, this is what is going to happen here when Alok Ganguly and his family come to meet Ashima. This is not actually the beginning of the story, but I would like to begin there because I want to read out to you the way she writes about this bride viewing. It's right at the beginning of the book. So if you are going back home or to college, to the library, to look at your books, I would like to say that this is in the beginning. This is chapter 1, which is 1968, and we have Alok Ganguly's family visiting Ashima's family. Well, it had been after tutoring one day that Ashima's mother had met her at the door, told her to go straight to the bedroom and prepare herself. A man was waiting to see her. He was the third in as many months. The first had been a widower with 4 children. The second, a newspaper cartoonist who knew her father, had been hit by a bus in Esplanade and lost his left arm. To her great relief, they had both rejected her. She was 19, in the middle of her studies, in no rush to be a bride. And so obediently, but without expectation, she had untangled and rebraided her hair, wiped away the coal that had smudged before her eyes, patted some cuticura powder from a velvet puff onto her skin. The sheer parrot green sari she pleated and tucked into her petticoat had been laid out for her on the bed by her mother. Before entering the room, the sitting room, Ashima had paused in the corridor. She could hear her mother saying she's fond of cooking and can knit extremely well. Within a week, she finished this cardigan I'm wearing. Ashima smiled, amused by her mother's salesmanship. It had taken her the better part of a year to finish the cardigan, and still her mother had had to do the sleeves. Well, when she entered the room, the man was sitting in a rattan chair, his parents perched on the edge of the twin bed where her brother slept at night. He was slightly plump, scholarly looking, but still youthful, with black thick-framed glasses and a sharp, prominent nose. A neatly trimmed moustache, connected to a beard that covered only his chin, lent him an elegant, vaguely aristocratic air. He wore brown socks and brown trousers and a green and white striped shirt and was staring glumly at his knees. That's how Ashima meets Alok Ganguly for the first time. Well, to take the story forward, they do approve of each other, or the parents approve of each other, of them, of the two of them. They get married, and Ashima goes to the US with Alok Ganguly. This is 1968, but I have to take you a little earlier to 1961, where the story actually begins. Well, Alok is traveling in a train where he happens to meet one Mr. Ghosh, who you notice is the last in my list because he is there for a very short while. Because Alok meets him on that train. There is a bad accident. But before that, Mr. Ghosh had advised him when they were talking about what Alok was doing. Alok is a young man, still looking around for a job. And it was Mr. Ghosh who had advised him when they met on that train journey about the importance of going abroad. So Mr. Ghosh had advised Alok Ganguly that it would be a good idea to go abroad. Why? Because Mr. Ghosh himself, who was a businessman, had lived in London for a couple of years and thought life there was much, much better. Much, much better than what is in India. But he says his wife did not like the place, and that is why he was forced to come back. This Mr. Ghosh advises Alok Ganguly, you are still young, free. Do yourself a favor before it's too late without thinking too much about it first. Pack a pillow and a blanket and see as much of the world as you can. You will not regret it. One day it will be too late. Well, that was the advice Mr. Ghosh gave him. But very soon there is a terrible accident. A lot of people on that train die, including Mr. Ghosh. But Alok Ganguly survives, and he survives, he thinks, because there was a book which protected him. And the book that he was reading was The Overcoat. The writer of The Overcoat is Gogol. Alok Ganguly could never forget this incident and always thought that it was that book which saved him, because he was later pulled out. But I'm not going into all those details, but he was pulled out by a rescue team. And later, he decided to take Mr. Ghosh's advice and go abroad. He had a long period of hospitalization and recuperation, which is when he probably decided that he would go abroad. He has not been able to forget it, even though it's such a long time since it happened. And now he is in the US, he is in MIT, but yet those memories keep recurring. And that is why, when he does have a son, he decides to call him Gogol Ganguly. But I'm jumping. Let me go to the beginning of Gogol's life. The birth of Gogol, which is also in chapter 1. Let me read to you how the writer describes the birth of Gogol. The baby, a boy, is born at 5:05 in the morning. He measures 20 inches long, weighs 7 pounds, 9 ounces. Ashima's initial glimpse before the cord is clipped and they carry him away is of a creature coated with a thick white paste and streaks of blood, her blood, on the shoulders, feet and head. A needle placed in the small of her back has removed all sensation from her waist to her knees and given her a blistering headache in the final stages of the delivery. When it is all over, she begins to shiver profoundly as if beset with a etc., etc. Gogol, as they decide to call him, when they have to name him, because they cannot wait for somebody to decide on the name, as is the custom in India. They do try to wait, but then, as there is no time, they finally do name him Gogol. Why Nikhil? I'll come to that later. So the story progresses with Gogol growing up. Gogol decides at some stage that he does not like the name Gogol. It's very interesting that actually Gogol is the surname, the last name of the writer. But Alok Ganguly makes it the first name of his son. and therefore he becomes Gogol Ganguly. He thinks everyone finds the name funny. He cannot continue to accept this anymore, and suddenly one day he decides that he's going to change his name. And so he does change his name. Chapter 5, at the beginning of the chapter, Jhumpa Lahiri writes, plenty of people change their names: actors, writers, revolutionaries, transvestites. In history class, Gogol had learned that European immigrants had their names changed at Ellis Island, that slaves renamed themselves once they were emancipated. Though Gogol doesn't know it, even the writer after whom he was named, Nikolai Gogol, renamed himself, simplifying his surname at the age of 22 from Gogol-Yanovsky to Gogol upon publication in the Literary Gazette. So, what does our Gogol do, Gogol Ganguly? One day in the summer of 1986, in the frantic weeks before moving away from his family, before his freshman year at Yale is about to begin, Gogol Ganguly does the same. He rides the commuter rail into Boston, switching to the Green Line at North Station, getting out at Leshmere. The area is somewhat familiar. He has been to Leshmere countless times with his family to buy new televisions and vacuum cleaners, and he has been to the Museum of Science on field trips from school. But he has never been to this neighborhood on his own, and in spite of the directions he has written on a sheet of paper, he gets briefly lost. Well, he reaches the courtroom, and then he decides to change his name here. The idea to change his name had first occurred to him a few months ago. He was sitting in the waiting room of his dentist, flipping through an issue of Reader's Digest. He'd been turning the pages at random until he came to an article that caused him to stop. The article was called Second Baptisms. Can you identify the following famous people? Was written beneath the headline. A list of names followed, and at the bottom of the page, printed in tiny letters upside down, the famous personalities they corresponded to. The only one he guessed correctly was Robert Zimmerman, which was Bob Dylan's real name. He had no idea that Molière had been born John Diptys Poquelin, that Leon Trotsky was born Lev Davidoff Bronstein. Go to chapter 5, my dear students, and read to see how many great people have changed their name. Well, so did our own Gogol Ganguly become Nikhil Ganguly. Well, let me go on to the other characters. Ashima Ganguly, the wife of Alok Ganguly, the mother of Gogol and Sonia. Sonia is the younger sister of Gogol, who was born when Gogol was in kindergarten, was still called Gogol and not Nikhil. Maxine and earlier Ruth are the girlfriends of Gogol. Maushmi is the Bengali girl who he finally marries. Anyway, that's a quick look at the main characters of this novel. But let's take the novel forward. Alok Ganguly and Ashima Ganguly continue to grow in not so new a home anymore because they're gradually getting used to life in the US. Their children grow up torn between the two cultures, the culture that they have at home and the culture that they face outside. In his interaction with Maxine, we notice that Gogol is often a very confused man, because everything about Maxine's family seems to be very, very different from what he is used to at home, at his very, very Bengali home. So let me quickly read for you what, again, chapter 6, my dear students, page 136 in my edition, could be something else in yours, but it's chapter 6. So when he visits the Ratcliffes, that is Maxine's family, from the very beginning, he feels effortlessly incorporated into their lives. It's a different brand of hospitality from what he's used to. For though the Ratcliffes are generous, they are people who do not go out of the way to accommodate others, assured in his case correctly that their life will appeal to him. Gerald and Lydia, the parents, busy with their own engagements, keep out of the way. Gogol and Maxine come and go as they please, from movies and dinners out. And so on, the way they meet at the dinner table. And sometimes he's also surprised at the show of affection that he can see in the Ratcliffe family. He's also surprised at how easily Maxine can talk about her past. Maxine is open about her past, showing him photographs of her ex-boyfriends in the pages of a marble-papered album, speaking of those relationships without embarrassment or regret. She has the gift of accepting her life as he comes to know her. He realizes that she has never wished she were anyone other than herself, raised in any other place or in any other way. This, in his opinion, is the biggest difference between them. And then the contrast. She is surprised to hear certain things about his life, that all his parents' friends are Bengali, that they had an arranged marriage, that his mother cooks Indian food every day, that she wears saris and a bindi. Really, she says, not fully believing him. But you're so different. I would never have thought that. Well, their relationship does continue till Nikhil realizes, by now Nikhil, Gogol has become Nikhil, so I'll call him Nikhil Ganguly, realizes that the closer he gets to Maxine and her family, the further he is moving away from his own family. And the decision has to be taken after his father's death, when he feels that he has a duty to his mother. Well, so the next character that I'm going to talk to you about is Maushumi. Maushumi is the Bengali girl who, according to the parents, are more compatible with Nikhil, for the simple reason that she is Bengali, that she's grown up in a Bengali household, has Bengali cultural traits, and they get married. But what happens to them